Hi, I'm Father Ken Metz. I'm a retired priest here at All Souls Parish in Sanford, Florida. You might wonder what I'm doing up here by this chair. Well, this chair is the place where we ordinarily, when I'm presiding at Mass here, recite the Creed from. And I remember everybody to stand up and we begin the Creed. Now, that's what I want to talk about today is the Creed. But I want to show something to you first. I want to show you the stick. I'm going to break it. Wow. This represents, in the early days of the church, which would have been clay, a clay tablet. And if you entered into an agreement with somebody or you agreed with one another, you would write down your agreement on the clay tablet. And then later on, when you'd want to make sure that it was the same clay tablet, what they would do is they'd kind of come and they'd want to stick it together again. And that would show that you had this agreement. And it truly was the same agreement. Like this. Now, why would I do this? I mean, breaking sticks in church, there's a reason for it. And the reason is found here in the sacramentary, or called the Roman Missal. And it says, in number 19 in the order of the Mass, instead of the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, especially during Lent and Easter, the baptismal symbol of the Roman Church, known as the Apostles' Creed, may be said. And so there are two creeds here. We have the Nicene Creed on this page and the Apostles' Creed on this page. They call it the baptismal symbol of the Catholic Church. Let me explain that to you. First of all, the word symbol came from my sticks. This clay tablet that they used to use was called a symbolon, from which the word symbol came. And it meant that this was the agreed upon beliefs that people have. The word credo or creed means I believe. And so this was the list of beliefs that people learned while they were becoming Catholic Christians. Now, the main time when they learned that, of course, was during Lent, during their time of preparation when they were catechumens, before they were baptized. And it was an interesting thing is that the creed was given to them just a few weeks before they were baptized. They had spent maybe 4 years preparing for that baptism. And they finally presented them the whole creed. And they would go home, memorize this, and come back and repeat it to us. St. Augustine, in one of his sermons, says sometimes they didn't memorize it too well, so he had to encourage them to remember all the words. So they'd have to know this baptismal creed into which they were going to be baptized. But that baptismal creed, the baptismal symbol, was not the first creed. The first creed is something most of us do every day, probably without thinking that it is the creed. Every time we go in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, we're saying the primitive creed of the church. I believe that there is a God who is the Father. I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit given to us. That's the primitive creed in the church. That's what they were baptized with at the beginning. But by around the year 200, it had more formalized itself into the Apostles' Creed. So we'd say the first was the primitive creed, the second was the Apostles' Creed. Then there was a third creed called the Nicene Creed, came out of the Council of Nicaea, and that was much longer. And then you had the Athanasian Creed, which was even longer than that. In fact, on the diagram, you'll see here that the primitive was much shorter than the Apostles, and the Apostles was shorter than the Nicene Creed, and the Nicene Creed was still much shorter than the Athanasian Creed. Why did it change? What happened? Well, people wanted to get deeper and deeper and deeper into the meaning of their faith. And so they began to wonder, well, who is God our Father? What is God our Father like? And so they said, well, God our Father is the Creator. It's the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God the Father, Creator of heaven and earth. Okay? And the same thing was with Jesus. They would deepen their understanding of Jesus, that he came, that he suffered, that he died for us. And then by the time you get to the Nicene Creed, it got even longer because there were people at that time that had a lot of questions. And they wanted to know, well, no, we need to understand this in a deeper way. And then by the time you came to St. Athanasius, which is about 50 or 60 years after the Nicene Creed, it's much longer because Athanasius was really spelling out what the belief of the church was, because there were many people, many priests, and even some bishops that said things like, well, Jesus was man, but he wasn't God. And so Athanasius spells this out in detail, how Jesus is God and he is man. He was not a man masquerading as something else. He was not God masquerading as a man. And so the creeds grew up over those first 4.5 centuries, always deepening our faith. But back to where we started. Why the Apostles' Creed during the season of Easter? It's because it's that simpler, more to the point, baptismal creed, baptismal symbol. And remembering that this is our symbolon. When we come to church and we celebrate the creed and we say the creed together, what we're doing is saying, yes, I agree with everyone else. And together, as one person, as one body of believers, we believe the same thing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.